She hit the ground before she ever saw it coming. Metal, screaming. Rotors gone silent, the horizon folding into dust and heat. The wreckage burned white against the desert, and for a moment, the only sound was her breath. Sharp, uneven, alive. She remembered the weight of her rifle, the sting of fuel on skin, the taste of sand where her name used to be. Command was gone. The map meant nothing. Survival became procedure check pulse. Find shade, stay small. She wasn't supposed to make it out. But endurance isn't luck. It's discipline under collapse. Some truths you only learn when the noise dies. Drop a comment. Subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from. Because this wasn't about escape. It was about control when everything else broke. The desert opened in silence, a boundless expanse of pale dust and sun glare stretching beyond the limits of comfort or patience. At 0700 hours, the last echo of rotor wash faded into the wind, leaving behind only the brittle hum of heat and the faint metallic scent of brass scattered in the sand. The California sky burned white over 29 Palms, where the Marine Corps trained for wars not yet named. Captain Elena Cross stood on the observation berm, her boots sinking slightly in the powdery dirt. Sweat marked dark lines beneath her collar, tracing the edge of discipline rather than exhaustion. She had been here for weeks, long enough to read the rhythm of the desert, to tell when the air changed before a sandstorm, and when the recruits began to break under it. Around her, voices carried through comms, clipped and precise. Every phrase came wrapped in ritual, the cadence of order holding chaos at bay. Cross had a stillness about her, not the absence of motion, but the studied calm of someone who had learned that control is not something granted by rank, but built in the space between decisions. Her eyes tracked movement across Range Bravo, where squads rotated through urban assault drills. Every explosion of dust marked an error corrected, every silence a chance to reset. Below her, Staff Sergeant Dean Mercer moved with purpose that disguised impatience. His instruction was efficient, but edged with something sharper. He paced among the Marines with a confidence that bordered on ownership. His voice, even at a distance, carried authority, but the kind that sought recognition rather than respect. Cross noted the subtleties. First, the dismissive glance when she issued a correction, the slight hesitation before he acknowledged her call sign. Small things, tactical things, things that grow if left unchecked. By midday, the temperature breached 105 degrees. The ground shimmered like water. Cross adjusted her cover, scanning the line of Marines through the scope of her binoculars. She could see Mercer standing too close to one of the recruits, gesturing toward her observation post as he spoke. The recruit nodded awkwardly, caught between obedience and discomfort. Whatever Mercer said was lost in the static, but tone carries without translation. Cross lowered the glasses slowly. There were rules for command, not written on paper, but carved into habit. She knew better than to answer disrespect with confrontation, control under pressure, restraint under watch. She turned toward the range control tent, calling in the next rotation with precision that bordered on ritual. The words left her lips measured and cool. The radio operator gave her a look, small, uncertain, but she didn't respond. The silence was its own answer. In the heat shimmer, Mercer continued to drill the Marines, his movements deliberate, assertive, almost theatrical. To an untrained eye, it would look like confidence. To hers, it looked like testing. He knew she was watching. He wanted a reaction. When the training day ended, the desert turned gold beneath the setting sun. The wind shifted cooler, whispering through the antenna wires and empty shell casings. Cross dismissed the platoons, her tone steady, her posture unchanged. Mercer passed close enough to meet her eye. A moment hung there, the weight of unspoken challenge balanced against the quiet strength of rank. She did not speak. She simply turned back toward the horizon, hands behind her back, gaze steady. The sound of his boots receded into the distance. The narrator's voice softened, the tone measured and grave. A reflection, not a judgment. in every command. There comes a moment when silence becomes strategy, when restraint, not retaliation, becomes the mark of authority. As twilight fell across the range, Cross remained at her post, the light fading behind her silhouette. The desert had gone still again, but something beneath that stillness had shifted, the faint tremor of tension waiting for its fracture. By midday, the desert had turned into a living furnace. Heat shimmered off the dirt like breath from an open wound. The sound of shouted commands, rifle bolts, and running boots blurred into one relentless rhythm, the kind of rhythm that stripped away personality, leaving only endurance. Captain Elena Cross stood at the edge of the training field, one hand resting on her belt, the other shielding her eyes from the glare. The wind carried grit across her face, fine, stinging particles that clung to every crease in her uniform. Her ribs ached from an old bruise, the kind that lingered after weeks of drills. But she didn't shift. Stillness had become her armor. Around her, recruits moved through close-quarters combat scenarios, their gear clattering like metallic punctuation in the desert, silence between commands. Staff Sergeant Dean Mercer walked the line again. His movements were deliberate, efficient, but louder than necessary. Each correction he gave came with an undertone, a quiet provocation disguised as authority. He adjusted stances, redirected grips, corrected aim, and every so often, his gaze would flick toward her, testing, measuring. The sun climbed higher. The air felt heavy, weighted with more than heat. Cross's posture remained precise, though her breathing had begun to slow, the subtle rhythm of someone conserving not energy, but composure. The desert had become an audience of dust and silence, waiting for the inevitable break. The first spark came small. Mercer's tone sharpened as he corrected a Marine's clearing technique. Then, louder. A rhetorical question cast into the open air, his eyes trained upward toward the observation platform. Not a violation of protocol, but close enough that everyone could hear it for what it was. Cross didn't react. Her hands remained folded behind her back, her face unreadable. The wind caught her hairline beneath the cover, pressing sweat into the collar of her blouse. Mercer descended from instruction to challenge. When she finally stepped closer, calm, measured, no trace of confrontation. The field seemed to hold its breath. Her boots left clean prints in the dirt, each step deliberate. She spoke only through presence, not words. Mercer turned to face her. The air thickened between them. Then came the demonstration. He called for a partner drill, a defensive takedown, meant to show technique, not strength. But something in his stance gave it away before it began. Shoulders forward, hands loose, jaw clenched. He wanted to make a point. The motion was fast, too fast for instruction. In a single pivot, his knee came up hard, sharp, driving into her side. A dull crack echoed under the heat, not loud, but unmistakable, the kind of sound that draws silence. Cross staggered half a step but caught herself before gravity could claim her. The breath left her lungs in a rush, not a gasp, but a controlled exhale, the sound of discipline containing pain. Her hand brushed her side only once, fingertips tracing the fracture beneath the fabric. The Marines nearby froze, eyes darting between them. Mercer didn't speak. He didn't need to. The strike had already said what he wanted it to. For a moment, time fractured with her ribs. Dust hung in the air, suspended, as if the desert itself refused to move until she did. When she straightened, the stillness was absolute. Her posture reset, her chin lifted a fraction, her eyes unreadable. The pain radiated through her side, precise and sharp, each heartbeat echoing in the bruise forming beneath her blouse. But her authority, that remained intact, more intact than ever. She gave no order, no reprimand. She simply turned and walked, past the stunned recruits, past Mercer's still form, toward the command tent. The sound of her boots in the sand became the only movement on the field. Inside the medical bay, The air was cooler. The faint hum of the generator replaced the noise of drills. Cross sat on the cot while the corpsman unwrapped the elastic bandage, inspecting the swelling. She refused the painkillers, taking the roll of gauze into her own hands. The wrapping was slow, methodical. Each pull of fabric across her ribs was a quiet act of control, of reclaiming what had been tested and not broken. Outside, the range continued. The rhythm of training resumed as if nothing had happened. But Mercer would know. Every Marine who saw it would know. Silence, she realized, could travel farther than any accusation. When she stood again, the sun had shifted lower, flattening the light into long, harsh lines across the ground. She paused near the open flap of the tent, watching the horizon blur in the heat. The pain pulsed beneath the bandage with every breath. Each throb was information, physical evidence of what had been done. In her mind, she began cataloging details: the time, the location, the witnesses, the cadence of Mercer's step before the strike. Every second filed away with clinical precision. Her expression remained calm, but her thoughts had sharpened into something crystalline. Pain is data. The narrator's voice reflected, low, deliberate, almost reverent. It tells the body what to protect, and the mind what to remember. For Captain Elena Cross, it told her something more. That control, when tested, is not fragility. It's calibration. She stepped out into the light once more, posture perfect, eyes forward. The wind lifted a veil of sand across the field, erasing footprints as it went. Whatever came next, she would meet it not with reaction, but with record. Her silence had become a weapon. Night fell like a curtain across the California desert, and with it came a silence that felt both heavy and expectant. The sun had burned everything raw, but under the faint hum of generators, the world began to cool. Red safety lights pulsed across the forward operating mock village, range Delta 4, their glow cutting through the dust that hung low over the ground. The sound of nylon straps tightening, the soft clicks of safeties being tested, and the rhythm of boots shifting in gravel became the score of preparation. Captain Elena Cross stood by the field table outside the command tent, her hands resting on a clipboard that contained the night's training brief. On paper, it was a reaction evaluation, a sanctioned leadership stress test. But beneath the formal language, it was something else, a calculated act of precision. A test not of Marines, but of a man who had forgotten the meaning of restraint. The ink on the evaluation order was hers. The structure followed regulation. Every measure, every step, had been designed to appear routine. She had filed it quietly that morning, well before dawn, citing a need to evaluate squad coordination under low visibility engagement. Headquarters had approved without hesitation. Nothing about it seemed unusual. Nothing except her intent. The desert wind pressed against her uniform as she secured her helmet strap. Beneath the material, her ribs still ached. A dull, constant reminder of the line Mercer had crossed. But pain, she'd learned, could be refined, shaped, directed. She breathed once, steady and shallow, before calling for Corporal Vega. Vega appeared with her usual precision, posture straight, eyes sharp, but quiet in the way of someone who understood more than she was willing to say aloud. She'd seen the incident on Range Bravo. She'd watched her commanding officer absorb humiliation and not retaliate. That kind of restraint left marks deeper than bruises. Tonight, she followed orders with an attentiveness that bordered on reverence. On the table beside them, a small digital recorder blinked red, armed and ready. Vega checked its placement, ensuring it aligned with the field radio relay. Every word transmitted would be captured. Every deviation from protocol would become data. By 2100 hours, the teams assembled. The mock village lay ahead, a grid of low concrete walls and metal doors, designed to replicate a close-quarters engagement zone. Cross briefed the mission in her usual cadence, detached, precise, calm. The objective was simple: assess leadership under pressure. She designated Mercer as the squad leader for the night's drill, a gesture that sounded procedural, but carried the weight of silent judgment. Mercer took the role without hesitation. The smug confidence in his posture said he believed the previous incident was buried. He mistook silence for submission. Cross led him. That was the point. The exercise began under minimal light. Marines advanced through the narrow alleys of Delta 4, shadows moving between the red strobes. Simulated fire cracked from speakers, the percussion echoing off the walls. Cross observed from the overwatch point, headset on. Her voice filtered through comms, even composed, unshaken. Mercer's tone over the channel was sharp, too sharp. His corrections carried a trace of irritation that cut against training protocol. Cross logged each one mentally, inflection, timing, deviation. Vega stood nearby at the monitoring station, the recorder's light steady as a heartbeat. Minutes passed. The pace accelerated. The recruits moved with growing uncertainty under Mercer's direction. His voice grew louder, his orders less coordinated. Cross remained silent, intervening only to note timestamps. Through her headset, the tension grew tangible, the edge of frustration, the hint of aggression masked as control. Then came the moment she'd anticipated. During a building breach simulation, Mercer broke formation protocol, pushing a Marine aside with unnecessary force. The mic caught the impact, the muffled grunt that followed. His tone escalated, each word a broadcast of arrogance and recklessness. Cross keyed her comms. Her instruction came through calm and procedural, a reminder of standard engagement order. Mercer ignored it. Instead, he spoke over the channel, his response dismissive, condescending. Every syllable caught in the recording's clean feed. Vega's eyes flicked toward the monitor, then back to Cross. The light on the recorder blinked once, capturing it all. The confrontation unfolded with surgical inevitability. Mercer turned toward her position, gesturing in irritation. His movement exaggerated under the dim red light. He advanced under the pretense of clarification, closing distance faster than the exercise required. Cross stepped down from the Overwatch platform, her movement deliberate. She met him halfway, the sand soft beneath her boots, her body steady despite the ache that pulsed with every breath. When Mercer reached for her arm, attempting to assert proximity, she redirected him, clean, efficient, within procedural limits. A defensive maneuver taught in every officer course: minimal contact, maximum control. The motion broke his balance. He stumbled a step backward, regaining footing just as his mic picked up the sound of frustration. A half-uttered curse. Cross froze him there with silence. No reprimand, no reaction. Only the weight of his own voice played back in real time through the comms loop. Every Marine nearby heard it. Every instructor monitoring the channel did too. For a long, suspended moment, the desert held its breath again. The red lights pulsed across their faces, him flushed, her calm. In that rhythm, the power dynamic reversed completely. Cross turned her head slightly, giving the signal to end the exercise. The radio clicked twice in acknowledgement. The recruits cleared their weapons and secured positions. Mercer stood motionless, realizing too late what had just been orchestrated. Vega stepped forward quietly, collecting the recorder from the table. The red indicator blinked once more before she powered it down. Cross approached and took the device from Vega's hand, slow, deliberate, gloved fingers brushing the metal casing. The hum of the generator returned as the night wind rose. Sand drifted across the clearing, swirling around their boots. The entire operation, from start to finish, had lasted under 40 minutes. No raised voices, no spectacle, just evidence, perfectly captured within regulation. Cross slipped the recorder into her pocket, the faint heat of the device seeping through the fabric. Around her, the Marines began their teardown. The exercise would be logged as completed, her report filed by morning. The narrator's voice, low and steady, carried the closing reflection. Retribution doesn't always arrive as noise. Sometimes it comes wrapped in discipline, methodical, exact, and irrefutable. Cross looked once more toward the village, now dark except for the residual glow of red lights bleeding through dust. Her ribs still ached, but the pain had changed. It no longer spoke of humiliation, only calibration fulfilled. When she turned toward the talk, the wind caught the edges of her sleeve, the patch on her shoulder flickering under the light. The recorder remained in her hand, a small, blinking truth earned through silence. The proof was complete. Morning arrived without warmth. The first light of dawn pushed through the narrow blinds of the command building, slicing the air into lines of pale gold and shadow. Inside, the temperature was cooler, the silence heavier. The faint hum of ventilation and the slow tick of a wall clock filled the room with the sterile rhythm of waiting. Captain Elena Cross sat at the far end of the debrief table, uniform crisp, boots shined, posture immaculate. Beneath the pressed fabric, a strip of elastic tape bound her ribs, a quiet reminder of what restraint had cost. Across from her, Staff Sergeant Dean Mercer shifted in his chair, the sound of metal legs scraping concrete breaking the otherwise perfect stillness. His confidence, once loud enough to fill a training range, had grown brittle. At 0800 hours, the commanding officer entered. Papers were set neatly on the desk. Rank insignia gleamed in the light. Formalities were observed without words. Corporal Vega stood near the playback unit, her expression composed, the small recorder resting on the table like an unassuming artifact, the proof of everything that had happened. The review began in silence. Mercer's report was read first, an account framed by technical language and the pretense of professionalism. He spoke of field dynamics, aggressive leadership, and context under stress. The words stacked neatly, built to defend, not to admit. His tone carried effort, the kind that strains under the weight of its own construction. Cross said nothing. She didn't need to. Her eyes stayed level, fixed on the middle distance. Every breath measured, every movement disciplined. The stillness between them was not passive. It was pressure, the kind that exposes cracks in whatever stands against it. The commanding officer gave a nod toward Vega. The small red light on the recorder blinked alive. Static filled the room, faint at first, then clear. The playback began. Voices, distorted by the comms, echoed in the sterile air. Mercer's orders, sharp and unfiltered, filled the space. Each command grew more aggressive, each phrase more revealing. His tone, once hidden beneath protocol, bled through the recording. Frustration, derision, authority twisted into ego. No one spoke. The sound of his voice alone carried the indictment. The weight of the evidence was not in what he said, but in how he said it, the tone, the intent, the absence of respect. Then came the final moment, the impact, the curse, the silence that followed. The audio cut abruptly, leaving the room hollow and still. Mercer exhaled, too loud, too fast. He tried to explain, the words forming but falling short, the justifications tangled in his throat. He leaned forward, hands tense on the table, but the commanding officer's gaze stopped him cold. No one interrupted. No judgment needed to be spoken. The system was built to process truth through evidence, not emotion. And now, truth had a voice, his own. Vega reached forward and paused the playback. The click echoed softly, final in its precision. She stepped back into position, hands clasped behind her back, her face unreadable but steady. The commanding officer wrote something brief, deliberate. A signature followed. The folder closed with a muted thud. The procedural tone of the decision was almost clinical. Staff Sergeant Mercer was relieved of duty pending formal review. Effective immediately. He stood slowly, jaw tight, eyes avoiding the faces around him. For the first time, his silence was not power. It was absence. He left the room without a word, his boots clicking in uneven rhythm down the corridor until the sound faded into nothing. Cross remained seated. She did not watch him go. Her focus stayed forward, her expression unchanged. Vega, across the room, met her eyes for a fraction of a second, an exchange without movement or words. It wasn't triumph. It was acknowledgement. The air seemed lighter once the door closed. The light through the blinds caught the edges of Cross's collar, glinting faintly as she adjusted her posture. The pain in her ribs pulsed once, then settled. The narrator's voice returned, low and reverent. Discipline is not the absence of emotion. It's the mastery of it. And sometimes, justice arrives not through force, but through the quiet precision of truth. Vega was dismissed with commendation for procedural integrity. Cross stood to sign the official record, the pen steady in her hand. When the ink dried, she placed it neatly on the desk and gave a slight nod, not to the officer, but to the process itself. Outside, the sun had risen fully. The desert glowed with the clean brightness of morning, the wind carrying the faint scent of dust and oil. Cross stepped out into the light, her uniform catching the warmth she'd been denied for days. There was no celebration, no vindication spoken aloud, only the calm that follows order restored. She never raised her voice, the narrator concluded, the tone steady as breath. She didn't need to. Her silence had already done what shouting never could. The day had softened into evening by the time Captain Elena Cross entered the mess hall. Overhead lights cast a muted glow across stainless steel tables, the hum of conversation low and steady. Forks touched trays with the rhythm of routine. Outside, the desert wind pressed faintly against the windows, a whisper of dust and calm. Inside, everything looked ordinary again, but nothing truly was. Cross moved with deliberate pace, her posture composed, her breathing careful beneath the bandage wrapped tight across her ribs. The pain was no longer sharp. It had settled into something quieter, an echo, not a wound. Around her, Marines straightened subtly as she passed, an instinctive alignment that spoke without words. No salutes, no applause. Just a shared stillness, the kind that follows when truth has already spoken. She collected a cup of black coffee and took a seat near the far wall, where the light hit the metal surface in a thin reflection. Across the room, Corporal Vega sat with her team, posture easy, but eyes sharp, always aware. When their gazes met, there was no smile, only acknowledgement, the faintest nod. It carried more weight than a commendation. The air smelled faintly of salt and machine oil, of uniforms that had worked through dust and heat. Cross took one slow sip, the bitterness grounding her. Around her, the conversation continued, clipped tones, laughter subdued but genuine. Life had resumed its rhythm. The machine of the Corps moved on, as it always did. Yet beneath that rhythm, something unspoken lingered, the awareness of what discipline can cost and what it can protect. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a moment of still reflection. The memory of Mercer's strike flickered, not as anger, but as instruction. The echo of his voice on the recording, the sound of the playback ending, each piece of it now settled into order, like tools cleaned and returned to their place. She had not sought to win. She had sought to preserve something larger, the standard, the structure, the quiet integrity that kept chaos from swallowing command. Her hand traced the rim of the coffee cup, slow, rhythmic. It wasn't pride she felt. Not exactly. More like acceptance. Justice had come not through victory, but through verification, through proof handled with steadiness and faith in the system she served. When she rose, the chair made a soft scrape against the tile. She crossed the room without looking back, each step measured, her boots landing in precise cadence. As she neared the exit, her path took her past the flag, its colors muted in the evening light, the fabric shifting gently in the conditioned air. She paused just long enough for the camera of the moment to linger, her eyes steady, the insignia on her chest catching a glint of light. In the adjacent office, her final report waited. She took her seat, straightened the paper, and read once more through the lines. Factual, restrained, complete. No embellishment, no omission, just truth, clean and exact. When she signed, the pen made a single click before the ink met the page. The sound was small, but final. Leadership isn't measured in commands given or conflicts won. It's found in the spaces between, in silence held with purpose, in control, maintained when pride demands release. Discipline isn't silence, it's command. And sometimes, the loudest justice is delivered in a room where no one raises their voice. Cross capped the pen, rose once more, and left the office behind. Outside, the light had faded to amber. The flag at the gate stirred faintly in the desert wind, its motion steady, unbroken. What stays with you isn't the crash or the noise, it's the silence after, when every breath feels like a decision. She learned that control isn't something you hold, it's something you keep when everything else is stripped away. No medals, no music, just the hum of wind over the range and the steady rhythm of a heart that refused to break pace. That's what leadership sounds like when no one's listening. If this story made you think about what endurance really costs, tell me below. I read every word. Subscribe if you believe restraint can hit harder than rage. Share this with someone who still thinks power is loud. Because sometimes, the strongest voice in the room is the one that doesn't rise above a whisper. The sand's settled for now, but the horizon's never empty. Stand by for the next mission.